everybody, Philip here saying hello to everyone and welcome back for lesson 3. Now today is going to be coding for beginners, so it is of course your introduction to the idea of coding towards your mobile app that you want to create. Now I hope you're looking forward to this because it is going to be the start of our actual development stage as well. Now before we jump into the lesson, start off with a quick recap of lesson 2. Because lesson 2 was the end of our design stage and it's all about who is your audience or who is your user. So of course within this lesson we looked at our personas and our targets. But how exactly did we do this? So for our personas we looked at building our own profile of the user that we want. So we looked at who is our user. What exactly is happening? How are they absorbing the content? When will the user be actually in the app itself? Where are the users coming from, okay, and when are they going to be using the app? Then you have to think about why will they use the app, because again, you have to actually give them value. And of course, how they are using the app overall. This is more of a design aspect in terms of orientation. So of course there's quite a lot when it comes to our personas, and of course if you're unfamiliar with what I'm talking about, I do recommend you go to the members area and of course check out the previous lesson. Now when it came to our targets, we looked at identifying your user, and we want to know who exactly is going to enjoy your app. This will help us tailor specific marketing towards them, and of course tailor their experience within the app, keep them coming back. But we also looked at how we do our own research. And of course, personas do fall into this as well. But there's some other categories that we have to look at, such as our market research, surveys, and of course, focus groups of users as well. And then lastly, we all looked at actually gathering our own data. So we do this by, of course, analyzing the competition, setting realistic goals for our own app. We then also look at feedback through our alpha testing and our beta testing to help us build an efficient strategy so we can go forward and move into what all today's lesson is about, of course, and that is our coding. So this lesson is all about coding, specifically from a beginner's point of view. Now it's important to note, right from the very start, programming is not for everyone. And I've already actually received a few emails from you letting me know that you have your concerns about learning to code. Now I am happy to tell you that that is a lot easier than it used to be. It's a lot easier to actually get started with coding than it ever was in the past. So it's a lot easier for all of you who have any of these concerns that it might be a little bit too much. When it comes to coding now, you do not need a fancy degree or lots of expensive equipment. You can actually get started right now, pretty much for free with little to no knowledge. So let's have a quick look at some coding examples. What you see on the screen now are two different types of code, and they both do the same thing. So what you can see is an example of HTML on the left and Java on the right. Now Java is the type of coding we're going to be looking at in our later modules. Now right now, if you look at both of these lines of code here, they actually are both a simple button click. That's all it is. When you actually read this, it reads as on button click do X. It's as simple as that. They're actually not that complicated at all. But for the untrained or for anyone who's never actually dove into coding at all, this can be quite cumbersome. You can look at this and get a little bit scared. Now that's not the type of coding we're going to do today. The type of coding that we're going to do today looks a little bit like this. These are what we call blocks, and we're going to use MIT App Inventor to use these blocks. Now a block is simply a set of code that is pre-made for us to simplify the coding process. We have many different types of blocks that we will look at in App Inventor itself, and we're going to be using these to actually build our own very first app within this lesson. But before that we get to that, of course there's an awful lot before we jump straight into coding. Let me break down what this does for you here, and keep in mind this is a simple button click process as well. So if we think about the HTML Java code that you've just seen, This is doing the exact same process. Simply, if we break it down, the gold block that we do here, this simply means that when the button is clicked, now what you can see is the word start button. That's because I've named the button start button. So when start button is clicked, do or add text to the text box saying. So this is add text to text box 1, the actual text box that I've created, because we can have more than one text box. So add to text box 1 the text that is hello world. So if we break it down like this, you get a good understanding of how the code starts to work. You're able to read it a lot more simply than you would if you were to dive into any sort of coding such as Java. So today's lesson is obviously getting you to understand these blocks of code. And then as we move on, you will actually get to unearth and understand how we make these blocks up in different applications and different coding languages. Now for this, you will of course need MIT App Inventor itself. So before coding, and the first things first, you are going to need MIT App Inventor. You will see the link on the screen there. This will allow you to actually download App Inventor itself. So if you're actually watching this lesson as a recording, I would recommend now pausing, taking this link here, typing it into your URL, and actually going and getting MIT App Inventor itself. For anyone who is following along, I am going to go through how to get App Inventor and how to set it up quite quickly. Now make sure you're installing this to a laptop or a desktop, okay? And you are going to have to use a specific website, which is just ai2.appinventor. A quick Google search and you'll be on your way. Now from this website, we're also going to be able to install and run an emulator. This emulator is what I'm going to use during the lessons to actually code and show you how to make everything in App Inventor. But it is also possible, and if you read up on App Inventor itself, you'll find it's also possible to actually run and live preview any app that you build, all code that you use, within your Android phone or your Android tablet. Now, if you are one of those who does not have an Android phone, this is where the emulator comes into play. Now, bear with me, and I will jump into the website itself. I'm going to type it into the URL now and show you exactly what it looks like to download and how the interface is going to look once you install MIT App Inventor 2. Okay, so this is the web page that URL that was on the previous slide is going to bring us to. Now, just in case you didn't have the time to jot it down, it is highlighted in blue in the URL bar just above you there, okay? So make sure that you jot this down while I'm demonstrating and talking about what's happening on the page in front of you. So what we're going to do is we're going to install App Inventor 2 for a Windows machine, because that is the machine that I'm using myself. Now, if you are on a Mac, of course, it might be a little bit difficult to do this without partitioning your hard drive. If you're on a Linux machine, you should be able to do the same and work off on a Windows style machine. So we can see here that installing the App Inventor 2 is technically installing a setup software package. This will allow us to actually install the emulator that I'm going to be using throughout these lessons as well. But again, keep in mind that you can use your Android phone or tablet as a live preview as well. Now this will work for all different types of Windows, whether it's XP, Vista or previous older versions. Of course, I'm using Windows 10 here, so again, I'm more up to date as well. All you actually have to do on this page is highlight the download the installer option and click. This will download the file that you need to your usual download section. It's generally for most people in the downloads folder on your machine. Highlight that, open it up, and you will be prompted with an install wizard. Just follow all of these steps and you will be on your way to installing MIT App Inventor on your actual machine. And of course you will need that for today's lesson and a few of the lessons going forward. Once that's simply done, you can set up a desktop icon to allow you to access MIT App Inventor quite quickly. So therefore, before you start your next lesson, you can actually have it ready to go, just in case you want to follow along with any of the other lessons. So once you've actually installed App Inventor, there's one more thing I need you to do, and that is use your standard browser, which I hope is Chrome or Firefox, and just do a quick search in Google for MIT App Inventor 2. Now this of course will bring you to a website that's going to look like this. Now you will be prompted to sign in with your email address, so do not worry, just sign in. It works really well with Gmail based accounts. Now if you look, there is the actual URL that you need. It's simply just ai2.appinventor.mit.edu, which stands for education. Now this is free to use for absolutely everybody, so make sure that you get the correct site, and it looks pretty much the exact same as what you see in front of you now. Once you're on the MIT App Inventor site, all you actually have to do is start new project. Now I'm going to give this the name of Lesson 3 because that is the lesson that we're on today, and I'm just going to hit OK. This is now going to bring us to a brand new screen, which is our interface for actually starting to create our first app. Now let's quickly go through this interface because we have an awful lot ahead of us here. Now obviously we're going to take it at baby steps so I can teach everybody as nice and as easy as I can how to use this interface. But this means that we have no hard coding in front of us. Everything is going to be nice and simple, and we have two different views that we can flick through. We have our designer view, which is how the screen is actually going to look. And then we have our blocks. So if you see in the top right corner here, we have designer and blocks. And blocks are where we get all of our code from. So we get to actually do both sides of our development and our design using MIT App Inventor. We can add in buttons, images, we can figure out our layout, our animations, social. There's an awful lot that we can actually do, even in terms of our storage. So let's go back up to our user interface, jump back into our blocks so you can see the interface here. When we actually want to code, we can see we have an awful lot of different options. So if we go to our gold here, which is our control, we know that all of these options will allow us to do something in our app. So you can see here that we have evaluate but ignore result. If this is what we want to do, then do this. And these are all our statements. Again, I'm going to explain this in the lesson today before I actually code anything. So I just want you to get familiar to how everything looks, where everything is, and the fact that there's actually a designer and a block view as well. Again, if you're watching this as a recording, feel free to pause now and actually go through everything yourself. Otherwise, stay tuned because I'm going to explain all of the different types of codes that we're going to be using in today's lesson. Okay, back to our before coding section. Now I have to say, don't expect your first app to be world class, professional quality. That will come in time after you've built the basics functionality. So set your expectations a little bit on the low side, especially for today as you're only beginning to code. Enter with the understanding that you're going to learn a new language, and that can take a little bit of time to understand and actually become fluent in. Now you may even choose more than one language because we know that there's plenty of different coding languages out there. If you are actually putting in the time, planning and dedicating yourself necessarily, you will be able to create valuable apps that mean an awful lot to you and the people who will use them. So before we actually get code, let's start off with something that we first need to do, and that is of course to identify the problem. And to do that, we're going to jump back to our old friend here, something that you should be familiar with, and that is our design document. So keep all four of these in mind, and at this stage we should have them nicely planned for the app that you want to build. So let's get started with our first stage, which is identifying the problem, which of course will eventually be our elevator pitch. Now at this stage we really should be called it identifying the solution, because that's what we are looking at to achieve. So the first step to examine the problem carefully is to identify what qualifies as a solution. A problem may have many different solutions, but they will have something in common, and this is our requirement. So when we're building our apps and identifying the problem, we need to figure out what our requirements are, and of course our specification to that as well. So let's start with something very basic. Let's try and find the requirement for a simple dice game. So as you can see here, our requirement for a very simple dice game is to be able to create a random number between 1 and 6. This is all we actually want our app to do. Just very simply, when I press a button, or when I shake the phone itself, as if you were rolling dice, we want the phone or the app to react and create a number between 1 and 6. So this is our requirement for that app, and our specifications on how to do so is simply all we need is a bit of a button interaction, and obviously an information layout. We need somewhere to actually display the text, which in this case is the number. Now that's all well and good said, but let's actually build this app in App Inventor so you can get familiar with the interface, understand blocks, and of course actually build your very first app. Now it's going to be quite basic, but at least it's something that you've done yourself. So bear with me because we're going to jump back into App Inventor on the website itself. Okay, so here we are back in our Lesson 3 project. And what you can see in front of you is the design side of our interface. So always remember our requirements, what we want the app to be able to do. Okay, and that is of course create a random number between 1 and 6, which is going to be a nice dice game if you're into your board games. This will be quite handy, you won't have to roll the dice all the time. Now, let's stick with our design side of things first, and let's get that out of the way before we jump into our blocks. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to actually examine the interface properly. We can see on the left hand side we have what's called our palettes, and these are going to be all of the options that are available to us for our design. The viewer option is exactly what the mobile app is going to look like. Our components are going to show all of the actual parts of the interface that we choose from the palettes. And then we have our properties. And the properties will change depending on the part of the component that you've selected. Right now we have selected screen 1, which is our very first opening screen. Now this isn't going to be very complex, so we only need one screen. So let's talk about this here. The About screen is the information, and it will explain exactly what the actual app is going to be. So we're just going to say that this is a dice game. Simple as that. Then next we want to worry about everything else. So we're going to go in, app name can be Lesson 3, or we can call it Dice. The background color is going to change based on what we want. So I'm going to go for a more retro style like you'd seen in the slides. So we're going to change this background color to black. You can see how this changes the actual image itself to be whatever way you want it. Now again, I'm going to stick with black. We do not want a background image, but you can actually upload your own files to add your own image in. You can choose different screen animations, icons, and so on. So we're going to come down here and we're just going to have a look through all of the properties and make sure that we have everything that we want complete. Once you're happy enough with how this actually looks, we're going to start adding some more into this. Now again, specifications, we need to be able to add in a button. So I'm going to just click button and I'm going to drag it across to here. Now once I drag my button across, you can see that I've actually added it to the top left hand corner. If I want to change where the button is, I just simply need to go to the components, make sure that I have selected button and not screen, check out our properties and change everything that's in here. So what we want to do is of course change the name of the text that is on the button. So we're just going to say roll dice. Okay, we're going to change the alignment. We're going to center it. Now in the screen, I'm going to come back here and I'm going to change the alignment to center. So we actually put the dice button in the middle. And I'm going to put the button down the actual bottom instead. So this is the alignment of actual components on the screen. Now back to our button, I want to change the actual font itself. And if I change this to say 25, you will see that the button gets bigger. If of course I go the opposite way, it will get smaller. So let's just make it user friendly and have a font size of 25. If you want in any way to change the color of the button or the text, that can be done. So I'm just going to stick with the light grey for now and leave it as it actually is. You can also change a lot more got to do with this in terms of the shape, in terms of what it says, the different fonts that you use, where it's actually, how big it is in terms of height or width. But let's just make it rounded and leave it as it is. Now the next thing that we need is a text box, because we need somewhere to display the actual number that we're going to show. So you can see here that in our user interface we also get a text box. We're just going to simply drag this across, and this will be above the actual dice itself. So we want it to appear above the button. Now we're going to actually set the height of the text button. So make sure again in components you've selected the text button. We're going to come in here and we're going to change the height. And we'll just fill it by percent. So let's say that it is 75%. You can see that it stretches right up. With the width, we'll go about 50%. And it'll stretch 50% of the screen. Okay, so next is our text color. So we're just going to say that the text color is green to make it look like it's retro. Our background is going to be none, so therefore it will hide into the actual back of the screen. Now let's leave that as it is. Everything is set up the way we want it to, and we will just demonstrate this. Now first things first, we need to actually build our blocks. So our design side of everything is done. So we need to flick to our blocks now in the top right hand corner. Now simply all we want to do is come down to our button option and find some of the actual statements that we want to use, some of the codes or the code blocks that we're going to use. As this is just simply a button click process, we can see here that we have when button 1 is clicked, do whatever we want. So we're going to simply just drag this into our actual area. Next, we want to make sure that we go to text box, and we want to find that when text box, we should be in here, when text box 1 is set. So this now reads when button 1 click, set text box 1 to text. So now we want to go back up here to our text option within the built-in, and we simply just want to use the very first one here. This will allow us to type in anything that we want. So we want this to say hello world. Now this is not our dice game at the moment, but I just want to get the idea of how this is going to work across by actually saying hello world instead of our dice first of all. So let's go and connect. If you see the connect option up top here, you can see that you have different options. You have your AI companion, your emulator, and your USB. So the USB is when you actually plug your phone in and you're able to live update check the app on your actual phone. As I'm not doing that, I'm going to use the emulator so you can all see exactly what is happening. Now this does take a little bit of time, so at this stage if you're taking notes, make sure you take everything down. Make sure you have the time to type in and ask anyone questions. And while I'm doing that, I'm going to bring up what the actual emulator is going to look like. So it is now on the screen. This is our actual App Inventor emulator getting ready to actually work. And you can see now that the box here has changed to say emulator started, waiting 13 seconds to ensure all is running. You can also see that the actual emulator of the phone is working on the screen as well. Now as I said, this can be time consuming, so previously in our next lessons I'm going to have this up and ready to go. But as this is your first introduction, I'm just going to show you exactly what happens. So right now our screen is starting to run the emulator. It's trying to search for the blocks that it is, and it is going to run everything for us. Okay, let me just move this back out of the way. That's just to show you what's actually happening with the emulator. But here is the emulator itself, and it has loaded up our game. Now, if you keep an eye on the code here, it says when button is clicked, set text box 1 text to say hello world. So this is not exactly our dice game just yet, but just to show you how it works, if we select roll dice, we can see that it now says hello world. So all we have to do now is go back in and actually change a little bit of the coding and the parameters. Now, I'm not happy with the size of that hello world, so I'm going to go back to our designer, back into our text box. I'm going to up the size of the font to about, say, 40. We're then going to come down and actually have a look. And where it says hint for text box 1, I'm going to delete, so that doesn't show up on the screen at all. We're going to select numbers only, so it'll only display numbers. Okay? Back into our blocks, and we actually don't need hello world anymore. We're still going to keep the way our block is here, but instead we're going to go to our math option, and we're going to choose random integer from 1 to 100. But instead, we're actually going to change this 100 to 6, because there's only 6 numbers on a dice. Now, if I actually open back up my roll dice screen here, all of these changes, because the emulator is connected, should have automatically changed for us. We hit roll dice, and we now have the number 1. So all we actually have to do is figure out text alignment to be center, and the right font size that we want. So let's go up to about 80. Let's go back then to our actual emulator, roll our dice, and now we have an actual dice emulator, a dice app that we first built. Now, of course, we're going to look at exporting all of this just in case you have any questions in later lessons. For now, get your head around the actual interface of MIT App Inventor, how we can use specific buttons, and how we can use the blocks itself. Again, if I actually select roll dice again, it will keep giving me different numbers based on the actual click. Now, it's just random generated. Code is all done for us, and we're happy enough. So that is your very first app. Feel free to practice that as many times as you actually have to. There's only one small bit of coding in here. And feel free to make maybe a coin flip app where you would just have random integer from 1 to 2. If you want to do a 1 to 100, that is perfectly fine as well. And we can just go back to our, just to show you the 1 to 100. We can see how this changes completely. And it's always going to be random. So let's jump back to our slides and move on with today's lesson. So I hope I explained that nice and easy for everybody. But just in case you're still a little bit confused, do not worry, because we're about to go through some terminology which will clear some stuff up for you and help you out down the line. So let's break everything down that we've actually looked at and introduce you to the terminology that you're going to hear a lot of as we go forward. Now, I'm going to start with the word statement. So a statement is pretty much the instructions that direct the operation of the app. Okay? They pretty much tell the system what to do. So a statement can be thought of as a line of instructions. So as we can see from the actual statement that you see here, this tells the system what to do when we click the button. It sets the dice roll text to a random integer between 1 and 6, or it says hello world based on what we've just seen. So each block on App Inventor can be thought of as an individual statement, because these are individual instructions that tell the app or the system what to do. Now we can also comment all of our actual app, all of our blocks, and this is extremely important for everyone. Now I'm sure you can think why. There are a couple of reasons. The first of all, if you are working as part of a team, which is very common, you want others in your team to understand what exactly you're working on straight away, not spending ages trying to decipher your actual code. Second, it's really, really important for yourself. What if you're working on something, you decide to shelve it and come back to it a couple of months later? You may have actually forgotten what you were working on, what exactly you were trying to do, the actual issue or problem you were trying to solve. If you have already commented on your code, you could jump back in to see what you were working at with minimum amount of fuss. Now, from personal experience, the amount of times I have been working on code, left it to be, came back, and I didn't know exactly what I was working on, where to start from. I mean, if I had commented properly, I could have read the comment and jumped straight back in. So you will slip the odd time, but getting yourself into a habit to do so now will, of course, fix this. Now, I will very quickly jump into MIT App Inventor to show you how to comment. All you have to do is find the block that you want, right click and add comment. Once you click on this, you will be able to type in text for what it does. So this is simply just a button click. Now the more you have to it, of course the more you're going to be typing in. Now we also have something that's a little bit different, and these are our variables. Now variables are a little bit more complex, but simply just think of them as storage. Variables allow us to store data while the app is actually open and running. So this means you actually need to remember that all the data that you actually have typed in while the app is running is going to be cleaned or removed when the app is actually turned off. And variables are very, very important because there's a lot of different types of them. So here are some of the uses for variables that we can actually keep score with, okay? So again, we can keep score, we can track events. So say you're interested in only allowing the user to have 3 clicks. Well, then we need to actually store the amount of clicks within our blocks to stop the user after the 3rd click. Now, with variables, we can also store contacts and their details through actual variables as well. Now, App Inventor is only going to allow us to use 3 different types of variables because it is quite limited in the blocks of code that it has. And these are, as you can see, string, integer, and boolean. So a string will allow us to put characters together, such as our hello world. An integer will always have a numerical value. And our boolean will also always have either a true or false statement. The variables are quite good because, as I said, they can be used to store, change, and reuse data. Using a variable is like algebra. We can give x whatever value we actually want. So let's have a quick look at an example. So take this example that's in action here. It's very simple, but of course you have to understand how to read it. So when we're starting an app, when we've actually opened it, you see the name notifier, ask name notifier. So this will actually give a pop-up asking the user for their own name. So after the ask name notifier has actually gotten the text input that it needs, this is going to be storing using the variable. So we can now set our username to the actual response. So now we have gotten the same name of the player/user, and it's stored within the app itself. That all making sense to everyone? So what if we actually want the app to do something different? What if we wanted to do certain variables depending on certain conditions, certain button clicks, certain notifiers itself? These are what we call if statements or decisions. So let's have a look at our decisions. Has anyone ever heard of decision-making statements in programming? Of course, I know that some of you that are watching this lesson, of course, have. So make sure to actually help all of the other students that are participating. So variables can be used to make decisions in apps, okay? But it's as simple as this. If a condition is true, then run the statement. That is as simple as we need to understand with our if statements. So if is something that does something, we just have to know that basically we're using a statement. So let's run it through in a little bit more detail, okay? So again, there it is in plain English. If a condition is true, then run the next statement. But what happens if we wanted to do something if it's not true? This is where we get our ifs or our elses. And this is just a nice way of understanding. If statement is true, run statement. If it is not, run response 1, else run response 2. So it's just thinking about it yourself in any sort of daily activity. Open drawer. If the scissors is in the drawer, take the scissors out, else close the drawer, or else look somewhere else. It's just about understanding the same way or the same kind of thinking that a computer would do. Now, of course, that can seem a little bit complex, but it's just basically, well, making your actions basic. So let's think of it in terms of a mathematician. Maybe I'm a maths teacher, and you want to ask someone a question. What is 2 plus 2? So we know that the answer is 4. So if we have an app that asks this question, what is 2 plus 2? We require an input from the user. If they type in 4, this is the condition, then answer is correct. If they don't answer 4, then we have our if statement or our else statement. So if answer is 4, run the statement. If it's not 4, tell them that they're incorrect, or give them a chance to try again. Now, this is where it gets a little bit more complicated, because we're able to actually add on in all of our blocks more and more ifs or elses to it. So we can actually make a giant block of coding without actually understanding the code ourselves right now, but we will be looking into this. Now, obviously in Java, this would require a lot of quick and hard typing to actually code out. But with our MIT App Inventor, you would simply just have to hit the cogwheel and add on another else if or if itself. So statements can be extremely powerful, and they're very commonly used. So it actually is a good idea to get yourself familiar with them now, so they don't get too complex. So now let me break this down for you again, using again a real world example. And that is, of course, our traffic lights. So if the traffic light is green, then keep driving. This is simply our if the statement is true, then run it. So again, if we click on our little gear icon and we want to add in some ifs and elses, this simple code that we have here can also be broke down like this. So we would start off, if the traffic light is red, then stop. Else if the traffic light is orange, then prepare to stop. Else, keep driving. Because therefore we've told it that it can only be one of 3 options. If it's not red, it's going to be either orange or green. If it's not orange, it's going to be green. So we have chosen our traffic light and basically the driving app to do exactly what we want. Now I hope that makes a lot more sense, because we will be doing a little bit more coding in today's lesson. But of course, if you have any questions, feel free to email myself at any stage. Okay, so this part of the lesson is going to be all about actually jumping in and building something that we can cover over the next few coming weeks. So I myself am a big fan of the zoo, and I was thinking that it would be fun and interactive if we could all just check off the animals that we've seen as we walk it around the actual zoo itself. So this can be used worldwide in any zoo that you want, but we can turn it into a little game, make it fun, make it interactive. So that's what we're going to create an app in App Inventor to do this, to relay some important information about animals that you've seen in the zoo, maybe a wildlife park or a safari. And we're all going to build this over the next few lessons. Now we could simply just display the information, but then the app wouldn't be interactive, and thus we would miss out on all of the engagement. So of course we need to understand what our requirements are, and of course our specification. So we've covered this in earlier of the lesson before we jumped into the dice game. So again, it follows along the same parameters. The requirements for this app is that we should be able to select a specific animal, and we should be able to interact and engage with our selection. Our specifications for the app is of course button interaction, multiple screens so that way we can actually display the information. We need to have the layout of the information correct. We want to display a welcome message, and of course have a menu that we can actually navigate around. Now we're not going to do all of that in today's lesson, but of course this is something that we can keep building upon. So really we want to unlock animals as we actually walk around and get a bit more information about them. So of course we need to specify the list of requirements from a technical point of view. So again, this builds into your design document if you are actually going to do an app like this. So we need to talk about the app as if it's in abstract and what it actually needs. We want to be able to walk around the zoo and check animals off a list. It's as simple as that. So how can we make this fun and engaging for users? We are the designers, we are the developers. So this thought process comes down to us. And of course, our main focus is to build the app with our requirements covered, specifications, and of course making it fun and engaging. Now to do so for our design element, of course I'm always going to recommend prototyping. We of course start off with our elevator pitch for our actual program, but you will have to actually design a prototype of what you want it to look like. This will help you fully with any information that you want to put in and how the actual features of the app are going to work, especially the interaction. So you want to know what it's going to do. You want to be able to actually understand where the people are going to click. So of course this just only needs to be a specific sketch at the moment, because we are going to be looking at prototyping in our later modules a lot more. Now it might sound very simplistic at the moment, but there's going to be a lot going on behind the scenes with our actual blocks of code. So again, we're focusing more on the development stage, so again, just keep in mind the design stage as we actually go through it. Okay, so let's actually open up MIT App Inventor and actually start building this app, because we are going to cover it over our next few lessons. Okay, so we're back in MIT App Inventor now, and we're going to make our Zoo-Hoo game that we've just been talking about. Now to do so, we're going to start off by coming up to My Projects and jumping back to the Start New Project page that we would have seen originally before we started the dice game. So first of all, we just want to press on Start New Game, and of course New Project, and we're going to just name this Zoo-Hoo, which is the name of our app. Once we hit OK, this will bring us to a brand new project area to start off fresh and to begin our brand new app idea. So what we're going to do is we're going to just start building the design from scratch first, and we'll worry about the coding once we have our very first screen the way we want it to look. Now keep in mind that I may do this at a little bit of a faster pace than we did with the dice game, but do not worry, you can always of course watch this lesson again in the members area and go back over all the steps that you need to. This is important because we are going to be continuing on with this app idea throughout the later lessons. So let's start with the idea of the screen, and that we are going to add onto our very first home screen exactly what we want to see. So we want to start with a button. This is going to be our start button. This will be how we log into the actual app itself. So jump back to our screen in components here, and let's actually align this to the center and then bang in the middle as well. From here, we actually just want to edit the button itself. So I'm going to come down here and I'm going to just look at some of the properties that we have. We want to remove the text and in all caps just say start. Now I also want to change the shape to rounded just to give it a bit of a softer kind of style. Once you're happy with that, I will also turn on the font bold, so it really stands out to the user so they know that they have to press this. So it looks like a button, it stands out, and it's ready to be usable. Now something that I want to talk about now is our components again. Renaming your components is very, very important. You don't want to be halfway through building your app and you have everything that just says button 1, button 2, button 3 and so on, and you don't know what each one does. So it's very important for yourself, much like our commenting, to actually rename your components to stand out, to exactly tell you what they do. So this is simply just our start button. So I'm just going to name it STR BTN for start button. Now you will notice that I will be adding more buttons in. So this is a much better way to organize yourself when you're actually building your apps. And it's a nice habit to get into from the very beginning. So always rename everything going forward. So now that we have our start button ready to go, we want to also add in some of the images that we're going to be using. Now these are going to be more buttons, so therefore we're going to use the names for each button separately, okay? So I'm going to start by actually going to our layout options in our palette. And I simply just want to add in a table arrangement. This will allow me to put as many items as I want into a specific table, and it'll keep it all nicely organized for us. Back to our user interface, and I'm simply going to add 4 buttons into our table. Once our buttons are in here, you know what we need to do next. So we're going to have to rename these, and we're going to actually have to put an image into each button. So I'm going to start with button 1. We'll rename this, and I'm going to call it bear button, because this is going to be the button that houses our bear information within the zoo. So when we get to see the polar bear or the grizzly bear. So with that, we're going to come into our properties for the bear button, remove the text, and instead we're going to add in an image. So I'm going to use the upload file option instead. Using this here will allow us to actually choose a file that I have on the desktop. Now all of these images are coming from a vector that I have created, okay, and you are able to find loads of these on sites such as Pixabay, Shutterstock if you have an account, but Pixabay is free. If you already have some graphical skills, this of course is going to tie in to your actual mobile app development skills that you're going to learn as well. So if you're able to create all of these images yourself, it saves for the ability to actually outsource, and of course makes all of the app development cheaper. So let's choose our bear option and open this up. And here is our bear. Now, he's a little bit too big for the way it is because I want to add in 3 more images. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to change the height. And we can change the height by either pixels or percent. Percent will do it by the screen, and pixels will do it by each individual pixel in the screen. So I'm going to make this 150 by 150. Okay, that should be alright for now. Next we want to go on to button 2. So let's rename our button, and I'll just name this Wolf button. But instead of actually coming in here and showing you how to, just going to remove the text, how to upload the file from here, we do also have a media tab on our interface. And you're actually able to preload all of your media in to, again, make your workflow go seamlessly. So from here, I'm going to actually just upload our rest of our images. So I can upload the wolf, and this should upload into our media section. And I can also upload our rhino and elephant. So we'll upload the rhino, hit OK, and upload one more, which is our elephant, and hit OK. Now the choice of this is, now that they're loaded into the media tab, when I come to image here, I do not have to upload the file because it's already stored for us. So I just need to select the wolf PNG here, hit OK, and it's logged in. So again, we want to be 150 by 150. And we're going to do this for our other buttons. So we're just going to quickly rename this. This will be our elephant button. So we'll just call that Ellie button. And I'm also going to rename the last one here, which is going to be our rhino button. And hit OK. Now, with the Ellie button, we're going to remove the text. We're going to set the height to 150. Hit OK. Set the width to 150. Hit OK. And add in our elephant image. Then we just need to go to text for button 4. Remove this. Height 150. Width 150. And our image is going to be our rhino. And then we have the beginning of how we want our app to look. Now, I'm going to move into the coding section now in a second. But the whole idea of having the start button is that when the user presses the start button, this table of the 4 images, which are their own individual buttons, will appear. So therefore, we actually don't want the button to be appearing straight away, or the animals themselves to appearing straight away, sorry. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to go up to table arrangement. And here you can see that you have some parameters. You can set how many columns and how many rows are, just in case you wanted to expand on this and add in more animals, which we can do at a later stage. You can set the height and the width to be a specific amount. And you can also toggle the visibility. So if I toggle the visibility off, you can see that our start button is bang in the middle. And what will happen when we press the start button is it will become visible. And we're actually going to code this using our blocks. So that's what we're going to do now. Now there's one more thing we actually need to do before we jump into the blocks, and that is to add a notifier. And this is going to be a pop-up that actually asks the user to input their name. So a notifier is something different than a design. It's in our user interface, but if I try to add this on, it actually gets added on as a non-visible component, because it technically is not a part of the design of the screen. Now let's just rename this so we can see exactly what we're going to have the pop-up as. And we actually just call it Screen 1 Notifier, because it's going to be on Screen 1, because we will be adding more screens as we go on with building this app. So we hit OK and we have our Screen 1 Notifier. So now we need to go into our coding, and we're going to start adding in some blocks that will allow us to basically do everything that we've kind of planned for so far. Okay, so this is our blocks, and the first thing we want to do is set a variable, okay? So we're going to come into our blocks area, see everything that's here, our basic blocks that we have, all of the different types, and then all of our individual buttons that we've added on, and our screen notifier will have their own dialog boxes or code that we're going to be using. So I'm just going to first easily start off with our initialize variable, okay? And we want to change this to say player. Now with this, I also want to just quickly add in a blank text box. Now this might make sense straight away, but what we're doing here is we're setting the variable to basically remember the user's name when they input it. Once we start adding a little bit more code, this will become apparent. So what we're going to do is we're going to add in a screen initialize. So what this actually reads is when screen 1 starts, do something. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to call. So we're going to go down to our screen notifier, and we wanted to call our screen notifier that we've added in. And when we wanted to actually call this, we wanted to show a text dialog. So basically what we're doing is we're saying when the actual app starts, please give a pop-up box to say something. Now I'm going to make sure that this is not cancelable. That means that you have to actually fill in the details. So we make this false instead of true. And we simply just want to duplicate our blank actual text variable here instead. It is possible to go into the text and just grab a new one if you want, or you can right click and duplicate. So in here we're just going to write our message, and this is going to say please enter your name. Okay, and in the title it's going to say who are you with a question mark. Now we also want to make sure that when we actually get the input, everything remembers it, okay? So again, we're going to go to our screen notifier, and we're going to say when the screen notifier has the text input, we want it to get the global player, so we're just going to come into our variables, and we're going to set, and we're also going to go back into our variables, and we're going to get a get. So we're going to set this to global player, and we're going to get the response. So when the notifier actually has the text in it, we just want to get the actual global player's name and set it to response. Basically, we're telling the app to remember this. Now, the last thing we want to do before we move on to our bare screen is we want to actually have the start button show the animals when it's clicked. So we're going to come back into our control. Oh, actually, we're going to go to our start button, and we're going to get the when start button is clicked. It's already got the name in here, but you can change it to all of the other buttons that we've named. Hence, this is why it's so important to actually name. So when it's actually selected, we want to set the start button. So we want to set start button to visible. Remember, we turned the visible off. So we want to set it to visible on now. And we simply want to set this to true. Now this is all the code we actually need at the moment. If you need to run your emulator to test this, you may need to go to connect and reset. If you reset your connection, it will run the emulator all over again, just in case you have your previous app already loaded into it, okay? So let's get our actual emulator. Now in my hastiness, I have realized I've made a small mistake, so I'm actually going to just separate our set start button, separate our true, and bin this option, because we actually want to set the table arrangement to visible. So here's set table arrangement to visible, and we want this to be true. Now any kind of changes we make as we go, if the emulator is running, will actually take place while it's running. So here's our emulator here, and it is asking me to input my name, because this is what this lot of code is asking to do. So I better actually write my name, Philip. Now you can use the on-screen keyboard if needed. Now next, all we have to do is press start, and our images or our extra buttons of the animals should appear. And there we go. This means that everything that we've built so far is working. Now we want to build one more screen before we finish today. One more bit of code got to do with our bear button that we've actually created. So we're going to have, when bear button is clicked, we want to go or open another screen with start value. Now this needs to be the actual name of the other screen that we're about to create. So let's just duplicate this, bring it down, and we're going to call it bear screen. So just B-E-R, no cap for that, just or, and then capital S, screen. Now I want to point out that it has to be exactly correct. If you use caps, your actual screen name will have to have caps. If you use a space, your screen name will have to have a space. Otherwise, it won't be able to find where it actually is looking. Now, this has got to do with all types of coding. It has to be exactly the same as what you're looking for. Now, we also want to get a response, but instead of response, we want to get global player. So we can just duplicate that, or you will find it in your variables with your get, okay? Now, with that in mind, let's jump back to Designer. Let's add on a new screen, and this is going to be our bear screen. No space. Hit OK, and then this will give us the ability to change to bear screen. So we now have two different screens that we can actually use, built into the one app. So with our bear screen, the first thing that we want to do is we want to add in an image. This image is going to be the picture of our bear. And we're going to center it and center again. Now, next, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to add in a label. So label just here, and a second label. So with label 2, the text is going to read, this is a description of a bear and all bear related things. Now this is going to be quite a large description, and it's quite nice to already know what you're going to type in here rather than winging it just like I did. Next, okay, we're going to basically change the height and parameter. So let's just come in here and make this say the height could be 100 pixels, and our width can be 50 pixels. Okay, 50 looks a bit off, so let's make this 75. So this is going to be our description. Now we'll name label 2, and we'll leave it as our BEARDES or DEC, whatever you want, description. So we'll leave it like that. Hit OK, and label 1 is going to be a message for yourself. So again, we'll write this as bear MES for message. Okay, Now with the bear message, again, we want to maybe change the font size to be a little bit bigger. Maybe we'll go 20. That's a little bit too big. Maybe we'll go 16. Okay. And we want the text to actually be some code. Okay, back into our blocks, and this time you will see it's empty because we're on the blocks for the bear screen, which is highlighted up top here, and not screen 1, okay? So we're on bear screen. So what we want to do is we want to go to our bear screen, and we want to say that when bear screen is back pressed, we want to close screen. Okay, so that means we'll go back to our original screen. We also want our bear screen initialized. So when bear screen is initialized, we want to set our username, okay, which is going to be our bear message. Bear message, so set bear message text to join, okay. Now I'm actually going to add in one more string here, okay, so we can see. So we're going to set the extra string by just dragging it in, like so, and we can see now that we have 3 places. So what we want to do is we want to get our text. So we're going to just say, and in here we will write look out. Okay. Then I'm going to duplicate this and drag it to the bottom one and say a bear. And we want to get a start value. So we're looking for get start value, which is our user name. So now it's time to put all of this to the test. Okay, so here's our emulator and we're back to screen 1. I'm going to type in the name Philip, because that is my name. Hit OK. Make sure the start button works, which it does. It pops up our animals. Click the bear button. This will load our bear screen, which eventually is taking a little bit of time, but you can see there that it has loaded up, and it now says, look out, Philip, a bear, and this is where our description will go. So that's all of our coding for today. Let's jump back to our slides. Okay, so the weekly challenge is to get yourself the dice game, but of course, going forward, I will need you all to complete the animal app as well. Now the choice is that you can watch this lesson again and again to go through all of the steps, pause it, take down notes, whatever you need to do to make sure that you have the correct code. If you have any questions at all, get in contact with myself, okay? But do try to fill in the animal app, and feel free to go even further and fill in the rest of the images and the rest of the code needed for the other animals. It's going to be the exact same code as the actual bear code that we used, okay? So our next lesson is lesson 4, and it's going to be the development life cycle. We're going to look at the some processes, learning to code further, and taking it even further again on our animal app. Now our final notes, of course, is that practice makes perfect. So if you don't get it straight away, do play around with it. Do keep messing around. Have a look. There's a lot of different options in there, and feel free to experiment as well. Other than that, I will see you all back for lesson 4.